To this, in international news, the sex trafficking trial against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs in Manhattan, New York, enters its second day of jury selection today, with another 36 potential jurors expected to be questioned in the hours ahead. Now, Combs, who has been held without bail since September at the Metropolitan Detention Centre in Brooklyn, faces multiple charges and, if convicted, could spend the rest of his life behind bars. For more on this, we speak to U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us now from our bureau in New York. Sherwin, a very good afternoon to you. So Combs has been held in jail since September 16th, and despite repeated attempts at bail, he's been detained for the last 7 months or so, awaiting trial. And in many ways, this does speak to just the seriousness of the charges he'll be facing this trial. I mean, just remind us of the extent to what he's up against here.
Super serious charges here, Unati. I'll get to those 5 charges in just a moment, but 2 anecdotes as we get started here. First of all, Sean Diddy Combs' appearance, right? This is a 55-year-old former music mogul, one of the most powerful figures in entertainment in the United States, arriving at that Manhattan lower federal court yesterday. And we are told it surprised a lot of people by his appearance. Very grey, we are told. The sketch artist interpretation you see over my right shoulder is the only visual representation we will get because, of course, no television cameras, no electronic media allowed in federal court in the United States. So we'll be dependent on the sketch artist's interpretation of the visual dynamic that is laid out itself in federal court. And then also comments made to the judge by Sean Diddy Combs yesterday saying, quote, Your Honor, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I'm very nervous today. And I think that does speak to those 5 charges, Unati. 2 counts of sex trafficking, 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, and 1 count of racketeering. The racketeering charge carries a maximum sentence of life in prison. The sex trafficking charge also could result in life in prison with a mandatory minimum of 15 years for each count. Then, of course, the transportation charge also has a maximum of 10 years. So essentially, he could face life in prison were he to be convicted on 1 or on all of the charges. It'll be up to the judge to determine whether those sentences, if of course convicted, will run concurrently. Racketeering, of course, is a concept that a lot of people might not understand. It refers to a type of criminal activity that involves multiple illegal acts committed as part of a pattern that includes things like money laundering, Unati, extortion, fraud, and embezzlement. The indictment from the prosecutor says Combs was able to engage in a decades-long pattern of abusive behavior, particularly against women, in drug-fueled sex partnerships, including with male sex workers, in sessions they refer to as, quote, freak-offs, right? I'm sure you've read about these. The federal authorities, Unati, also claim that Combs turned his multifaceted business empire into a criminal enterprise in which he and his associates engage in acts like kidnapping, arson, physical violence, sex trafficking, forced labor, among other alleged crimes. Prosecutors say Combs coerced victims into these freak-offs, but of course, critical to the defense here is going to be this question of coercion. The defense is arguing that nothing was done without the consent here of the parties that were involved, and so consent is going to be a very key element to the defense when we get to that part of the trial. Of course, a long way from that process because a jury selection will continue for the next week.
I mean, the judicial system in the U.S. Is quite different to ours. I mean, isn't it? I mean, the whole jury element is quite fascinating. Just talk us through how the jury selection actually works and how long it's expected to last before we get to just the substance of this trial.
You're absolutely right. A judge decides essentially in South Africa, and there are elements of the judicial system in the United States where a judge will be the deferring factor in terms of guilt or innocence, but not in a criminal trial. A jury must decide beyond a reasonable doubt. There must be unanimity within the jury, the 12 jurors that are selected. And so we are now at the beginning of this process, right? Essentially, a pool of jurors presents itself each day. We're told about 3 dozen yesterday, 3 dozen today, and they essentially get interviewed by the judge and the prosecution and the defense. We understand that the prosecution and the defense have a number of strikes in terms of they can say, well, we don't want this juror because it's going to hurt our case. You don't even have to provide cause. They get a certain number of strikes. The judge also has an ability to weigh in terms of whether the juror will be unbiased or not. Let me give you an indication of some of the questions that they're being asked. Jurors are being questioned about their familiarity, Unati, with the case. For example, have you seen the video, the CNN obtained video from 2016 when Sean Combs is seen on hotel CCTV assaulting his then girlfriend, Cassie Ventura? The judge also inquired about potential biases within the jury pool towards law enforcement. Maybe they've had a run-in with law enforcement in the past. Questioned about whether they like hip-hop artists, whether they are familiar or have experienced sexual assault that could sort of inform their bias in terms of being adjudicators in this trial. And then there are also things like, logistical issues. Will you be able to be away from your job for 2 months, given the length of this trial? Do you have important events coming up within your family? Are you yourself a sexual assault victim and therefore, biased in a certain way? These are some of the logistical loopholes and obstacles that the interlocutors, the judge, the prosecutors, and the defense are going through to determine essentially an unbiased pool. So not essentially asking whether or not you know a little bit about what's happened in terms of the criminal indictment, but whether you will, despite that, be able to adjudicate this based on the evidence that's presented. That's what they're determining now. And then, of course, next Monday, we are hoping to get opening arguments. The prosecution will then initially lead their case. That could take a number of weeks. The defense will then get an opportunity to respond, and then it will go, essentially the judge will decide that it's now time for the case to go to the jury. They'll be sequestrated. They'll be locked away, essentially. They will now not have any access to media. They must then find unanimity on all the charges. It has to be beyond a reasonable doubt, and there has to be consensus within the 12 jury pool for a conviction to hold. But certainly a strong case one imagines that the prosecution has here. You get elements of this from the fact that he tried so many times in terms of his incarceration to get bail, and this was denied in multiple hearings. So certainly a mountain to scale if you are Sean Diddy Combs in this process.
Sherwin, thank you so much for that comprehensive update. Of course, we'll be watching very closely. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, our correspondent at New York, there in our bureau in New York, coming to us live there, just of course, giving us a sense in terms of the implications and what's at stake in this sex trafficking trial against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs.